What if the most anticipated tour were to begin with the absence of its two biggest names, a decision that, academically and strategically, feels strange, dramatic, and almost impossible, yet is now rumored to be real? That question hangs in the air, cutting through curiosity and instantly splitting fan timelines across the globe. Within hours, a rumor that initially circulated as whispers turned into a storm of opinion. A new HYBE policy is said to be the trigger, and at the center of the vortex stand two figures long considered the emotional axis and symbolic core of BTS, Jungkook and Taehyung. Is this merely an overblown misunderstanding, or is there a deeper policy dynamic at play, one that, when examined academically, signals a shift in the paradigm of artist management within the global entertainment industry? The word policy rarely sounds romantic to fans. Yet in an industry that blends art, business, and cultural geopolitics, policy is the silent engine that sets the rhythm. When news spread that a tour was reportedly set to begin without Taehyung and Jungkook, questions arose not only emotionally but also rationally. How could a corporate entity as large as HYBE make a decision that potentially disrupts public perception of its most valuable brand? This is where the story becomes intriguing and dangerous, because it touches the fragile territory of trust. Several unofficial sources claim the decision emerged from a new policy framework emphasizing rotation of appearances, schedule efficiency, and long-term stamina management for artists. In the academic language of talent management, such policies are often framed as sustainability strategies. However, when applied to cultural icons whose relationship with fans is built on full presence and emotional consistency, the impact can be the opposite. Is HYBE testing the limits of ARMY's tolerance? Or attempting to recalibrate global expectations? At this point, reports that Jungkook and Taehyung raise concerns, with HYBE over the decision become the focal point. The circulating narrative speaks of intense internal discussions, tinged with tension and heavy with questions. This was not merely about schedules, but about the meaning of presence. For Jungkook, known for his perfectionism and deep commitment to the stage, absence is not a variable easily negotiated. For Taehyung, who often views performance as a space for artistic dialogue with fans, absence feels like cutting a sentence off mid-paragraph. Is it true that there were objections? Or is this simply an exaggerated interpretation from the outside? Here, small clues fuel speculation. Fans point to shifts in tone within posts, more reflective word choices, and unusual communication gaps. In studies of nonverbal communication, such micro-changes are often read as indicators of internal pressure. Yet scholars also warn of confirmation bias, the human tendency to seek signs that reinforce pre-existing beliefs. ARMY, already inflamed by news of the new policy, may be subconsciously connecting that are not necessarily related. Still, the emotional reaction among fans has undeniably reached a boiling point. Timelines are filled with rhetorical protests. Can a tour without Jungkook and Taehyung still be considered complete? Does this new policy place efficiency above emotional connection? From a sociological perspective, the relationship between idols and fans is not a one-way transaction. It is a symbolic contract, where presence becomes the currency of trust. When that contract feels shaken, collective response is inevitable to HYBE, as a modern corporate entity, stands at a difficult crossroads. On one side lies the need to manage risk, health, and long-term sustainability for its artists. On the other lies the reality that BTS is not merely a music group, but a cultural phenomenon with a complex emotional ecosystem. Any new policy, whatever its final form, cannot be separated from public perception. Even if a decision is technically logical, symbolically it may feel cold. And in the age of social media, symbols are often louder than facts. Within this storm, the names Jungkook and Taehyung function like prisms. Every viewpoint passing through them refracts into a spectrum of interpretations. Some see them as artists courageous enough to voice concerns for the sake of stage integrity. Others view the reports as dramatization that harms all involved. Yet it is precisely this ambiguity that keeps the story alive. In the absence of firm clarification, speculation expands, and surprise lurks at the edges. Several entertainment industry analysts caution that moments like this often become turning points. In the history of global music, policy conflicts and key absences have sometimes led to major changes, whether in tour formats, communication patterns, or creative contracts. Will this case become a footnote soon forgotten, or will it mark a new phase in the BTS HYBE relationship? That question remains unanswered, and precisely because of that, public attention remains tightly bound. ARMY's emotions are not singular. There is anger and disappointment, but also a quieter anxiety, fear of distance. In fan psychology, symbolic distance, feeling left behind by decisions that are not fully understood, can be more painful than physical separation. When a tour is rumored to begin without two central figures, that distance feels multiplied. Is this a test of loyalty, or a sign that the industry is changing faster than fans' emotional readiness? At the same time, there are voices urging patience. They remind others that rumored does not mean confirmed, that policies are often fluid before finalization, and that internal debate is a healthy part of creative organizations. Within academic frameworks of governance, differences of opinion between management and artists can actually lead to more balanced outcomes. If Jungkook and Taehyung truly voice concerns, does that not indicate the existence of dialogue? But drama rarely thrives on balance alone. It lives on tension, and that tension is now palpable. Each day, without clarity, adds another layer of speculation. Every new rumor becomes a small shock that stirs emotions. Will there be an official statement? Will the policy be revised? Or will the public be confronted with a reality entirely different from the initial rumors? What is certain is that this story has not yet reached its climax. It is still moving, pulsing, and evolving. In the midst of the storm, Jungkook and Taehyung are not merely names, but symbols of a larger question about industry direction, the meaning of presence, and the boundary between strategy and feeling. HYBE's new policy may have been born of rational intent, but its resonance is unmistakably emotional. The silence that followed only intensified the sense of unease. In the absence of official confirmation, speculation began to take on a life of its own, evolving from fragmented whispers into full-fledged narratives that felt almost tangible. Fans dissected every public appearance, every delayed update, every carefully chosen word, as if the truth might be hidden between syllables. In academic terms, this phenomenon resembles what media theorists describe as participatory interpretation, where audiences do not passively consume information but actively construct meaning, often filling gaps left by institutions with emotionally charged assumptions. As days passed, the rumored tour schedule became a symbol rather than a plan. It symbolized uncertainty, power dynamics, and the fragile balance between creative autonomy and corporate governance. For Jungkook and Taehyung, whose artistic identities have long been associated with authenticity and emotional openness, being positioned, rumored or not, at the margins of a major tour created a dissonance that fans struggled to reconcile. How could voices that had defined eras suddenly be sidelined, even temporarily, without consequence? Observers of the K-pop industry noted that HYBE's trajectory in recent years has leaned increasingly toward global scalability. From a strategic perspective, diversification of presence and modular tour structures could be interpreted as an attempt to future-proof operations. Yet culture does not always bend neatly to strategy. BTS's global resonance was not built solely on flawless execution, but on the perception of unity and shared emotional labor. Any deviation from that image, however rationalized internally, risks reverberating outward in unpredictable ways. Emotionally, ARMY found itself caught between loyalty and skepticism. Loyalty urged patience, reminding everyone of past moments when fears were ultimately eased by clarity and trust. Skepticism, however, asked sharper questions. If such a policy could be rumored now, what might be possible later? If absence could be normalized, would presence lose its meaning? These questions were not accusations, but reflections of a community deeply invested in the narrative continuity of the group they support. The rumored reaction from Jungkook and Taehyung, described by insiders as firm yet composed, added another layer of complexity. Rather than explosive conflict, the picture painted was one of principled disagreement. This distinction matters. In organizational psychology, constructive dissent is often seen as a marker of maturity within creative systems. If artists feel empowered to question decisions that affect their connection with audiences, it suggests a dynamic relationship rather than a hierarchical one. Yet even constructive dissent, when filtered through rumor, can be reframed as crisis. What made the situation particularly volatile was timing. Coming at a moment when global audiences are more sensitive to transparency and authenticity than ever before, the lack of immediate clarification felt amplified. In the digital age, delays are rarely neutral. Silence becomes a canvas onto which the public projects meaning. And meaning, once widely shared, gains momentum regardless of its factual foundation. Some cultural critics began to frame the situation as a test case for the modern idol system. Can a structure designed for precision and control adapt to an era where fans demand emotional inclusion? Can policies be implemented without eroding the symbolic bonds that sustain fandoms over decades? Jungkook and Taehyung, intentionally or not, became focal points in this broader debate, not because of confirmed actions, but because of what they represent within the collective imagination. Meanwhile, anticipation mixed with apprehension. Each new day carried the possibility of resolution or escalation. Would HYBE step forward with a comprehensive explanation that contextualized the rumored policy? Would Jungkook and Taehyung address the situation directly, reclaiming the narrative from speculation? Or would events unfold in a way that reframed the entire controversy as a misunderstanding born of incomplete information? Until answers arrive, the story remains suspended in a state of heightened emotion. It continues to pulse through conversations, analyses, and quiet worries shared among fans who feel both protective and powerless. In that suspension lies the true weight of the moment, not in what has been confirmed, but in what has been felt, and perhaps that is the most telling detail of all. Regardless of how the situation ultimately resolves, it has already revealed something fundamental about the relationship between artists, institutions, and audiences in the contemporary cultural landscape. Presence matters.
Dialogue matters.
And when either is called into question, even by rumor, the impact can ripple far beyond schedules and stages. The waiting itself began to feel like part of the narrative, as if uncertainty had been deliberately woven into the fabric of the moment. Fans were no longer just reacting to rumors, they were living inside them. Every hour, without clarification, subtly shifted the emotional landscape, transforming curiosity into vigilance. In media studies, this prolonged ambiguity is often described as a pressure chamber, where expectations build not because of new information, but because of its absence. The longer the silence stretched, the more powerful any eventual revelation promised to be. Behind the scenes, speculation turned toward the internal mechanics of decision-making. If a new policy truly existed, who authored it, and under what assumptions? Corporate governance scholars often argue that policies emerge from risk assessments rather than emotional calculations. Yet BTS has never functioned solely as a corporate asset. Their success has always rested on a delicate synthesis of structure and sincerity. Removing or delaying the presence of Jungkook and Taehyung, even temporarily, threatened to upset that synthesis, not because of logistics, but because of symbolism. Symbolism, after all, is the invisible architecture of fandom. Jungkook represents continuity, growth, and an almost relentless devotion to craft. Taehyung embodies artistic freedom, emotional texture, and unpredictability. Together, they anchor contrasting yet complementary energies that many fans perceive as essential to the group's equilibrium. When rumors position them on the outside of a tour's opening moment, it felt less like a scheduling adjustment and more like a narrative rupture. Why start a story by removing two of its most resonant voices? As discussions intensified, some fans began revisiting past moments, searching for patterns that might retroactively explain the present. This retrospective sense-making is common in periods of uncertainty. People look backward not for nostalgia, but for clues. Had there been hints of disagreement before? Were there subtle signs of shifting priorities? Or was this entire controversy an example of collective overinterpretation fueled by emotional investment and algorithm-driven amplification? The emotional charge was further heightened by the global nature of the fandom. Reactions unfolded across time zones, cultures, and languages, creating a rolling wave of discourse that never fully settled. What calmed one region reignited another. In this way, the controversy never truly paused. It only migrated. And with each migration, the narrative evolved, accumulating new tones, anger here, concern there, cautious optimism elsewhere, until it became impossible to point to a single dominant emotion. Industry insiders watching from a distance noted how quickly the conversation shifted from the specific to the existential. It was no longer just about a tour or a policy. It was about agency. Who ultimately decides how idols show up in the world? At what point does strategic planning override artistic instinct? And where, within that structure, do the voices of the artists themselves truly land? Jungkook and Taehyung, by virtue of their stature, brought these questions into sharp relief. The lack of direct statements from the two only intensified the emotional projection surrounding them. Silence, in this context, was read in contradictory ways. Some interpreted it as restraint and professionalism, a refusal to inflame rumors. Others saw it as evidence of ongoing negotiations, or even quiet resistance. Communication theory reminds us that silence is never empty. It is simply ambiguous. And ambiguity, when paired with high emotional stakes, invites endless interpretation. As anticipation peaked, the possibility of a dramatic reversal began to circulate. What if the rumors were wrong? What if the tour would, in fact, include Jungkook and Taehyung from the very beginning, rendering weeks of anxiety moot? Such an outcome would not erase the emotional journey fans had already taken, but it would reframe it as a lesson in the volatility of modern information ecosystems. At the same time, the opposite outcome, a confirmation of the rumored policy, loomed as a potential rupture that would demand reconciliation rather than relief. In either scenario, something irreversible had already occurred. The conversation had exposed how deeply intertwined emotional expectation and institutional trust have become. Fans were no longer content to be reassured after the fact. They wanted to be considered in advance. They wanted transparency not as damage control, but as a foundational principle. This expectation reflects a broader cultural shift, one in which audiences increasingly see themselves as stakeholders rather than spectators. As the moment stretched on, a quieter realization began to surface beneath the noise. The intensity of the reaction was not simply about fear of absence, but about fear of change. BTS has long been perceived as a constant in a rapidly shifting world. Any sign that this constancy might be renegotiated, even for practical reasons, felt destabilizing. Jungkook and Taehyung stood at the emotional center of that fear, not because they caused it, but because their presence has long symbolized reassurance. When clarity finally arrives, it will do more than confirm or deny a rumor. It will redefine expectations. It will signal how future decisions might be communicated, how artist voices are weighed, and how much emotional capital institutions are willing to protect. Until then, the story remains unfinished, suspended between reason and feeling.